Graham didn't just block me from the Halcyon Maritime Club. He announced it to the line of donors like a public service announcement. He laughed as he told the staff I could not afford the membership fee. Thinking he was putting his little sister in her place, he was wrong. That smirk didn't break me. It gave me the fuel to build a $95 million resort that would eventually cast a shadow over his entire world. The salt air at the Halcyon Maritime Club always smelled like money. It was a specific scent, a mixture of brine, expensive cologne, and the distinct, crisp aroma of chilled champagne. I adjusted the strap of my evening gown, a vintage silk piece I had thrifted and tailored myself to look like it cost $2,000 rather than $40. I was 32 years old, standing on the precipice of the most exclusive social event of the season in our coastal town, and my stomach was turning over in slow, anxious knots. I was not a member, I was a +1. My friend Sarah, a graphic designer who had married into a shipping fortune, had invited me. She knew I was trying to get my hospitality consulting business off the ground. I had spent the last 5 years fixing failing bed and breakfasts and optimizing staff rotations for budget motels. I was good at it. I was efficient. But I needed bigger clients. I needed people who viewed hospitality as an art form, not just a line item on a tax return. Sarah squeezed my arm as we approached the entrance. The clubhouse was a sprawling, white-columned beast that sat on the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, glowing like a lantern against the twilight. "You look great." "Hazel," Sarah whispered. "Just hand them your card if the conversation feels right. Do not push it. These people can smell desperation like sharks smell blood." I nodded, forcing a smile. "I am not desperate." I said, "I am just hungry. There is a difference." We reached the check-in desk. It was a mahogany altar, manned by 2 women with severe buns and iPads. The line behind us was full of men in tuxedos and women dripping in diamonds that caught the light from the chandeliers. I felt small. It was a feeling I had spent my entire adult life trying to outrun. The feeling of being the poor relation, the one who did not quite belong. "Name?" the woman asked without looking up. Sarah gave her name. The woman tapped the screen, her manicured nail making a sharp clicking sound against the glass. "And your guest?" "Hazel Watson," I said. The woman's fingers froze. She looked up at me. Her expression shifted from bored indifference to something sharper, something guarded. "I am sorry," she said, her voice dropping a decibel. "We have a flag on your admission status. Ms. Watson." My heart hammered against my ribs. "A flag? That is impossible. I am just a guest." I felt the line behind us stiffen. People were watching. A delay at the check-in desk was a social sin. Sarah looked at me, confused. "Hazel, what is she talking about?" "I do not know," I said, my voice rising slightly. "There must be a mistake. Can you check again?" The woman pursed her lips. "I'm afraid I cannot let you in. Ms. Watson, it is a committee directive." Then, a voice cut through the murmuring crowd. It was a voice I knew better than my own heartbeat. It was smooth, rich, and laced with a toxicity that only I seemed to be able to taste. "Is there a problem here?" Graham Watson stepped out from the main hall. My brother. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand, looking every inch the king of the coast. He was 5 years older than me, and he had inherited everything. The charm, the connections, and the ruthlessness. "Graham," I said, relief washing over me briefly. "Tell them it is fine. I am with Sarah." Graham looked at the woman at the desk, then at me. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile he used when he was about to crush a competitor, or when he used to break my toys when we were children and claim it was an accident. "It is all right." "Brenda," Graham said loudly. His voice carried over the heads of the waiting guests. "My sister is a little confused about how these things work." He stepped closer. Placing a heavy hand on my shoulder, he squeezed just hard enough to hurt. "Hazel, honey," he said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "You can't afford the membership fee. We have talked about this. You are not in a position to be here." The silence that followed was absolute. I felt the blood drain from my face. He had not just said I was not a member. He had made it about money. He had made it about my worth. I am a guest. Graham, I managed to say, my voice trembling. I do not need to pay the fee. Graham chuckled. A dark, rich sound. He looked at the line of people. Wealthy investors, local politicians, the very people I needed to impress. We have strict rules about financial standing. Hazel, even for guests. We can't have people here who are unstable. It makes the donors nervous. He turned to the staff. Please escort my sister to her vehicle. She's a little emotional. The humiliation was physical. It felt like a slap. I saw Sarah's mouth open in shock, but I did not wait for her to defend me. I could not stand there for 1 second longer. I turned and walked away. I kept my head high, my back straight, refusing to run. Even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to flee, I could hear Graham's voice fading behind me, apologizing to the crowd for the disturbance, playing the role of the benevolent protector dealing with a problem sibling. I held it together until I reached my car. A 10-year-old sedan parked in the furthest lot, hidden away from the Bentleys and Porsches. I got in, slammed the door, and locked it. Only then did I let out a sound, a strangled cry of rage that fogged up the windshield. My hands were shaking so hard I could not put the key in the ignition. I gripped the steering wheel. Breathing in ragged gasps, I replayed the moment in my head, the look in his eyes, the specific wording, financial standing, unstable. It hit me then, cold and sharp. The woman at the desk hadn't just reacted. She had seen a flag that had been placed there before I arrived. Graham knew I was coming. Sarah must have mentioned it to someone. And word got back to him. He had gone to the committee. He had pre-warned them. He had engineered this entire scene. It was not a spontaneous act of cruelty. It was a premeditated execution of my reputation. He wanted me to know that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how good I was at my job, he held the keys. He was the gatekeeper. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My mascara was intact. My eyes were dry. The tears had burned up in the heat of my anger. Fine, Graham, I whispered to the empty car. You do not want me in your club. I will build something better. The next morning, the sun was too bright. It glared through the kitchen window of my mother's house, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I had driven over early, needing coffee and, foolishly, perhaps some comfort. My mother, Eleanor, sat at the small kitchen table, nursing a cup of herbal tea. She looked frail. Since Dad died 5 years ago, she had shrunk, as if his presence was the only thing that had given her volume. Now, she existed in the spaces Graham allowed her to occupy. I heard about last night, she said softly, not looking at me. Of course you did, I said, pouring black coffee into a chipped mug. Did Graham call you? Or did he stop by to gloat? Hazel, please, she said, her voice thin. He was just worried. He said you were making a scene. I slammed the mug down. Coffee sloshed over the rim. I was standing in line, Mom. I was standing in line, and he told half the town I was destitute. He humiliated me on purpose. Eleanor sighed, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. He is under a lot of pressure. Hazel, the family name. It rests on him now. He has to maintain certain standards. You know how much we depend on him. I looked at her, really looked at her. The nice clothes she wore, the house maintenance, the club dues she still paid despite never going. It all came from the trust, and the trust was managed by Graham. He controlled the purse strings, and therefore, he controlled the narrative. So I am supposed to just take it? I asked. I am supposed to let him treat me like a liability? Keep the peace. Hazel, she pleaded. For me, just do not antagonize him. We cannot afford a rift. She meant herself. She was terrified he would cut her off if she sided with me. It was a quiet, pathetic tragedy. I stood up. I could not be in that kitchen anymore. I felt suffocated. I'm going to look through Dad's things in the attic. I said, I need to find my birth certificate. It was a lie. But she did not question it. She just nodded. relieved the confrontation was over. The attic smelled of cedar and old paper. It was hot, the air stagnant. I pushed aside boxes of holiday decorations and old clothes until I found the plastic bin labeled Richard. Office. Dad had been a dreamer. He worked in commercial real estate, but he was always the number 2 guy, the one who did the work while someone else took the credit. Graham was nothing like him. Graham was a shark. Dad was soft. I opened the bin. Inside were stacks of files, old calendars, and a worn leather notebook. I sat on the floorboards and opened the notebook. It was filled with his handwriting, a messy, looping scrawl. There were notes about zoning laws, contacts who were long dead, and doodles of buildings. And then, I turned a page and saw it. It was a sketch. A detailed pencil drawing of a resort, but it wasn't a skyscraper or a gaudy casino. It was low to the ground, blending into the dunes. It had walkways made of weathered wood, glass walls that faced the ocean, and a marina that looked like a natural extension of the cove. Underneath the sketch, in Dad's heavy hand, was written, Cape Eddings, the parcel. Could be the legacy. I frowned. Cape Eddings was a desolate stretch of coast about 20 miles north. It was marshland and forgotten fishing piers. Why would Dad want to build there? I read on. There was a note dated 3 months before he died. Cannot trust the wrong hands. Graham wants a tower. He does not understand the land. I have to protect it. If I cannot develop it right, I will not develop it at all. My breath caught. Dad had hidden this idea from Graham. He knew Graham would ruin it. He knew Graham would turn it into another halcyon club, exclusive, cold, and soulless. I traced the lines of the drawing. It was beautiful. It was welcoming. It looked like a place where you didn't need a 7-figure bank account to feel at peace. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest. My quiet pain, the stinging shame from the night before, began to harden into something else. It crystallized into a plan. Graham had said I couldn't afford the membership fee. He was right. I couldn't join his world. So I was going to build my own, and I was going to do it on the land my father had dreamed of. I spent the next week barely sleeping. My small apartment became a war room. I pinned maps of the coastline to the wall. I pulled public records. I drank too much coffee and ate too much takeout. I found the parcel. It was an abandoned marina site near Cape Eddings, officially known as Lot 402. It was a disaster on paper. It was tied up in a foreclosure nightmare and plastered with environmental liens. The previous owner had gone bankrupt trying to clean up an old fuel spill. It was perfect. It was toxic, which meant it was cheap, and it was ignored. I put together a business plan. It was tight. I used every trick I had learned in my consulting years. I projected costs for remediation, construction, and staffing. I valued the land based on its potential, not its current state. I put on my best suit, the one Graham hadn't seen, and walked into the office of First Coastal Lending. I had a meeting with Mr. Vance, a loan officer who had helped me with my car payments years ago. Hazel, Mr. Vance said, gesturing for me to sit. It is good to see you. How is the consulting business? Growing, I said, but I'm ready for the next step. I slid the proposal across the desk. I want to acquire the Cape Eddings Marina. I have a plan to revitalize it. Mr. Vance put on his glasses. He read the executive summary. He looked at the numbers. He nodded slowly. The math is aggressive, Hazel, but it holds up. You have the experience. The land is undervalued. This is exactly the kind of revitalization project the county loves. I felt a surge of hope. It was happening. I will need to run the standard risk assessment, he said. Give me 24 hours to run it up the flagpole. I left that meeting feeling like I was walking on air. I could do this. I could actually do this. The next day, I returned to Mr. Vance's office. The mood had changed. Mr. Vance would not look me in the eye. He was shuffling papers, looking uncomfortable. I am sorry. Hazel, he said, we cannot approve the loan. My stomach dropped. Why? You said the numbers held up. It is not the numbers, he said. We received an advisory. An advisory? He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of an email. The sender was anonymous, a generic webmail address. Subject: Risk Alert. Watson, Application. Body: Be advised that the applicant, Hazel Watson, lacks the capital reserves for a project of this magnitude. There are undisclosed family liabilities that will likely result in default. Proceed with extreme caution. I stared at the paper. The words swam before my eyes. Undisclosed family liabilities. Who sent this? I demanded. We do not know, Mr. Vance said. But in this climate, an anonymous tip like this triggers an automatic freeze. We can't take the risk. I knew who sent it. I did not have proof, but I knew. Graham. He was watching me. He had ears everywhere. He knew I was making moves, and he had swatted me down like a fly. I stood up, crumpling the paper in my hand. Thank you for your time. Mr. Vance. I walked out of the bank, the sunlight blinding me. I felt cornered. Graham had the banks. He had the influence. If I tried to go through traditional channels, he would block me every time. I needed a different approach, and I needed someone who didn't care about Graham Watson or his country club reputation. I drove out to the site. Cape Eddings was gray and windy. The marina was a skeleton of rotting wood and rusted metal. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, hung with signs that said, "Danger" and "Keep out." A pickup truck was parked near the gate. A woman was leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette. She wore work boots, jeans that had seen better decades, and a canvas jacket. Her hair was chopped short and gray. I pulled up and got out. "Can I help you?" she called out. Her voice was like gravel in a mixer. "I am looking for the site manager." I said, "You are looking at her," she said. "Whatever is left of it. Name is Mara Klein." I walked over. "I am Hazel Watson. I am thinking about buying this place." Mara laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "You and every other idiot with a dream and a checkbook. You see those tanks over there?" She pointed to a cluster of rusted cylinders half buried in the sand. "Those are leaking diesel into the groundwater. The EPA has fines on this place that cost more than the land is worth. The foundation of the main pier is mush. You buy this. You are buying a grave." I looked at the tanks. I looked at the rotting pier. Then I looked past them. To the curve of the bay. The water was calm. The view was unobstructed. It was peaceful. "I know about the liens," I said, "and I know about the leaks. I have a plan for remediation." Mara took a drag of her cigarette and looked me up and down. She looked at my suit, my heels sinking into the sand. "You are a Watson," she said. "Related to Graham?" "Unfortunately." I said. She snorted. "I worked for a subcontractor of his once. Guy is a snake in a silk tie. If you are with him, get off my dirt." "I am not with him," I said sharply. "In fact, he is the reason I am here. He thinks I cannot do this. He thinks this land is trash." Mara narrowed her eyes. She dropped the cigarette and crushed it with her heel. "He is right," she said. "It is trash, but it is trash with good bones." She walked over to the fence and rattled it. "If you are serious, you do not need a banker. You need a miracle worker, and you need to control the cleanup yourself. If you hire a big firm, they will bleed you dry with change orders. You need to get in the mud." "I am not afraid of mud," I said. Mara looked at me for a long count. She seemed to be weighing something. "You have got fire. Kid, I will give you that. But fire burns money. How are you going to fund this if the banks are spooked?" I looked at the ocean. I thought about the rejection. I thought about the +1 status. "I am done with banks," I said, "and I am done with clubs. I am going to pitch this to private investors, but not the usual ones. I am going to pitch it to everyone Graham has rejected, everyone who has ever been made to feel small at the Halcyon." Mara raised an eyebrow. "What is the hook?" she asked. "Membership-free luxury," I said. "High-end access without the gatekeeping. No committees, no legacy requirements. You pay for what you use, and you get treated like royalty." Mara smirked. It was a genuine expression. "Unlike Graham's, an anti-club." She said, "That is crazy. It might just work." I left the site with a verbal agreement from Mara to walk the property with me properly the next day. I drove back to my office, my mind racing. I wasn't just building a resort anymore. I was building a revolution. I spent the night drafting a new pitch deck. I stripped away the corporate jargon. I made it personal. I talked about freedom. I talked about the ocean belonging to everyone. The next morning, I arrived at my small rented office space. It was just a single room above a bakery, but it was mine. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. On the floor, just inside the mail slot, was a thick manila envelope. It had no return address. My name was handwritten on the front in block letters. I picked it up. It felt heavy. I sat at my desk and tore it open. Inside was a single document. It was a photocopy of an internal memo from the Halcyon Maritime Club. It was dated 2 days before the gala. Memorandum for the Membership Committee. Subject: Guest Admittance. Restriction: Name: Hazel Watson. Status: Do not admit reason. Individual lacks financial solvency. Presence would be disruptive to donor relations. Advise staff to intercept at entry. I stared at it. It was proof. He hadn't just whispered in someone's ear. He had codified my exclusion. He had made it official policy, but there was something else in the envelope. A small, yellow sticky note attached to the back of the memo. The handwriting was different. It was jagged, hurried. He is doing this because you are closer than you think. I read the note 3 times. Closer than you think. Closer to what? To success? To the truth? I looked out the window at the street below. People were walking by, living their lives, unaware of the wars being fought in quiet rooms and private clubs. Graham thought he had buried me. He thought the memo and the bank rejection were the nails in my coffin, but he had made a mistake. He had underestimated me, and he had given me exactly the ammunition I needed. I pinned the memo to the wall, right next to the sketch of the resort. It wasn't a warning, it was a trophy. I picked up the phone and dialed the first number on my new list of potential investors. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady and clear. "My name is Hazel Watson, and I have an opportunity I think you will want to hear about." The war had begun, and I was going to win. The name came to me while I was scraping a layer of dried sea spray off my car windshield. Salt glass. It sounded like something beautiful forged from something harsh. That was what I wanted this company to be. I filed the incorporation papers for the Salt Glass Hospitality Group on a Tuesday morning, paying the expedite fee with a credit card that was already uncomfortably close to its limit. I was a CEO on paper, but in reality, I was a woman with a terrifying amount of ambition and absolutely no capital. The rejection from the bank, fueled by Graham's anonymous email, had closed the front door. So, I went looking for a side entrance. Ivor Dane was a name that people in the industry whispered rather than shouted. He did not appear in the social pages of the local papers. He did not sponsor galas at the Halcyon Maritime Club. He was a retired shipping logistics magnate who had quietly pivoted to angel investing. Rumor had it he hated noise and he hated incompetence. I managed to get a meeting through a former client who had managed one of his guest houses. I met him at a diner, not a boardroom. He was a man in his late 60s with hands that looked like they had tied 1,000 knots and eyes that scanned a balance sheet like a predator scanning the horizon. I did not give him the flashy pitch. I did not show him the glossy renders I had paid a student to mock up. I showed him the math. The property is undervalued by 40% because of the environmental stigma. I told him, pushing the spreadsheet across the laminate table, everyone sees a toxic waste dump. I see the only deep water access point north of the Cape that is not privately zoned. Ivor drank his coffee black. He read every line of my projection. "You are assuming you can get the liens lifted," he said. His voice was low, gravelly. "That is a heavy lift for a first-time developer. I have a strategy for that." I said, "And I am not a developer. I am an operator. I know how to run a property so it bleeds black ink, not red. I am not looking for a trophy. Mr. Dane, I am looking for a business." He looked at me over the rim of his cup. "You are Graham Watson's sister." I stiffened. I wondered if the poison had reached here too. "I am," I said, But salt glass is mine. Entirely mine. Ivor nodded slowly. Good. I do not do business with your brother. He treats contracts like suggestions. He set the cup down. I will give you the seed funding. $200,000 to secure the option and start the permitting. My heart leaped, but I kept my face neutral. In exchange for what equity? I asked. 15%, he said, but there are conditions. Name them. First, you keep majority control. 51% minimum. I do not want a board of directors fighting for the steering wheel. I want a captain. If the ship sinks, it is on you. If it sails, you get the glory. I can live with that. I said. Second, he continued, leaning in. Clean accounting, every penny tracked, no consulting fees paid to cousins, no charitable donations to foundations that do not exist. I know how things work in this town. If I see $1 moving sideways, I pull the plug and I take the assets. I thought about the anonymous email, undisclosed family liabilities. Ivor Dane was the antidote to Graham's poison. He wanted exactly what I wanted. Transparency. Deal, I said, extending my hand. He shook it. His grip was iron. Do not disappoint me. Hazel, I do not bet on horses. I bet on jockeys. With Ivor's check deposited, I moved fast. I secured a conditional purchase option on the marina site, locking the price at $400,000, contingent on a 90-day inspection period. It was a steal, provided the land did not kill me first. The first week on site was a wake-up call. The environmental reports I had seen were 5 years old. The reality was worse. I stood in the center of the yard with Mara Klein. The wind was whipping her gray hair across her face, but she did not seem to notice. She was staring at a hole her crew had just dug. The soil at the bottom was slick and black. It is not just surface runoff, Mara said, spitting on the ground. See that sheen? That is deep soil contamination. I crouched down. The smell was pungent. Old diesel and rot. How bad? I asked. Mara grimaced. There was a fuel storage tank here back in the 80s. The contractor who installed it, a company called Redshore, went belly up. They cut corners on the lining. It has been leaking into the substrate for 30 years. I felt a cold weight in my stomach. Remediation for a leak this size could cost millions. It would wipe out my construction budget before I laid a single brick. This kills the project, I said quietly. It kills a normal project, Mara said. But I told you, I know a guy. The guy was Tomas Red. He met us at the site the next morning wearing a suit that looked like he had slept in it and carrying a briefcase held together with duct tape. He was an environmental attorney who specialized in brownfield reclamation. He looked like a disaster, but when he spoke, he was a surgeon. You do not pay to clean this up, Tomas said, walking around the hole. You get the state to pay you to do it. Excuse me? I asked. He tapped the side of his head. The Brownfield Revitalization Act, Section 402. If you commit to a remediation plan that includes public benefit, shoreline restoration, public access points, you qualify for tax credits that cover 70% of the cleanup costs, and the rest? You sue the insurance carrier of the defunct contractor, but the contractor is gone, I said. The company is gone, Tomas corrected. The insurance policy is still active in the archives. I have chased these ghosts before. Hazel, we turn the pollution into an asset. You become the hero who cleaned up the coast, and the government subsidizes your foundation. It was aggressive. It was risky, but it was lawful. Do it, I said. The legal strategy gave me a path forward, but I still had a social problem. Cape Eddings was a tight-knit community of fishermen and service workers who had been pushed to the margins by the expansion of luxury real estate further south. They looked at me with suspicion. To them, I was just another Watson coming to pave over their history. I decided to face them head-on. I rented the community hall for a Tuesday night and put up flyers. Salt glass project. Open forum. I expected 5 people. 50 showed up. The mood in the room was tense. Arms were crossed. Faces were hard. I stood at the front of the room, alone. I did not use a microphone. My name is Hazel Watson. I said, and I know what you're thinking. You think I am here to build a gate and lock you out. A man in the back stood up. He was wearing a union cap. Your brother tried to buy the cannery 5 years ago to turn it into a yacht storage. He shouted, "Put 40 guys out of work before the deal fell through. Why are you any different?" I took a breath. Because I am not building a yacht storage, I said, and I am not building a private club. I unrolled a large map of the site plan I had been working on. I am building a resort. Yes, but look at this line here. I traced the perimeter of the water. This is a boardwalk, 12 feet wide, open to the public from sunrise to sunset. It connects the North Beach to the fishing pier. And this area here? This is a public launch for small craft, kayaks, skiffs, no fees for residents. The room went quiet. They were listening, and I need to build it. I continued. I am not bringing in a crew from the city. I am signing a local hiring guarantee. 50% of all construction jobs go to Cape Eddings residents, and once we are open, we prioritize locals for staff positions, not just housekeeping, management, logistics. I looked at the man in the union cap. I am not asking you to trust my name. I said, I know what my name means in this town. I am asking you to look at the plan. If I break these promises, I want you to shut me down. But if I keep them, we build something that brings money into this town without pushing you out of it. There was a long silence. Then, the man sat down. He didn't clap, but he nodded. It was a start. I went back to my office feeling like I had run a marathon. The tiny room above the bakery was filled with the smell of yeast and exhaust from the street. I was organizing permit applications when the door opened. I did not look up immediately. Leave the mail on the desk. Thanks, I said. Hello? Hazel? The voice made my pen stop mid-signature. I looked up. Graham was standing in my doorway. He filled the space, his tailored gray suit looking absurdly out of place against the peeling paint of my walls. He was smiling, that tight, practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Graham, I said, leaning back in my chair. To what do I owe the pleasure? Did you run out of people to insult at the club? He laughed, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. He looked around the office with amused disdain. Charming setup. Hazel. Very grassroots. He pulled up the only other chair, a plastic folding one, and sat down. I am not here to fight, he said smoothly. I heard you are making moves. Cape Eddings, that is a bold play. I heard things too. I said, I heard you tried to kill my loan application. Graham waved a hand dismissively. Banks are conservative. Hazel, I just wanted to make sure they had the full picture. I was protecting you from overextending yourself. I stared at him. The arrogance was breathtaking. I am fine, Graham. I have funding. I have a plan. So unless you are here to apply for a job, you can leave. Graham leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His expression shifted to something resembling concern. Look, Hazel, I know we have our differences, but we are family. I worry about you getting mixed up with the wrong people. That marina site. It is complicated. The option period is 90 days, right? That is a tight window to clear those liens. I froze. I had never told him the length of the option period. That was in the contract I signed with the seller. It was confidential. How do you know it is 90 days? I asked, my voice low. Graham blinked. For a split second, the mask slipped. He looked surprised that he had been caught. Then, just as quickly, he recovered. Standard contracts are always 90 days. Hazel, I am just guessing. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. Anyway, I just wanted to offer an olive branch. If you get in over your head, come to me. I can introduce you to real investors, people who understand the long game. You do not have to struggle in this box. He gestured to the room. Think about it. Hazel, you are playing a dangerous game. He walked out. I sat there for a long time, listening to his footsteps fade down the stairs. Standard contracts are always 90 days. That was a lie. Commercial options ranged from 30 days to a year. He knew the specific terms. Someone was feeding him information. Was it the seller? The agent? Or had he hacked my email? The paranoia was a cold shiver down my spine. But mixed with the fear was a sudden clarity. Graham was not just being mean. He was interested. He was sniffing around the project. Why? He had called the land trash. Why did he care about the details of my contract unless the land mattered to him? I decided to dig into Graham the way he had dug into me. I spent the next 2 nights online, tracing the web of his influence. I knew he was the face of the family business, but I wanted to see where the money actually went. I found his name on the board of directors for the Watson Coastal Giving Trust. I knew the trust existed. Of course, it was the family charity. They threw the annual gala, donated to the Maritime Museum, and put their name on hospital wings. But as I looked at the public tax filings, I noticed a pattern. The trust donated heavily to local municipal projects, park renovations, historical preservation societies, zoning boards. These were not just charitable acts, they were strategic. By funding the town councils, the trust, and by extension, Graham, bought favor. It was a status machine. He was using charity to pave the road for his developments. And then I saw it. A donation from 3 years ago. $10,000 to the Cape Eddings Historical Society. He had been watching Cape Eddings for years. I rubbed my eyes. I needed to understand why. I went back to the source. I went back to my father's notebook. I had kept the notebook in my safe, treating it like a holy text. I pulled it out and turned to the sketch of the resort. I looked at the details I had glossed over before, the curve of the shoreline, the placement of the pier. I pulled up a satellite image of the marina site on my laptop and placed the notebook next to the screen. I gasped. It wasn't just a similar location. It was the exact same parcel. The angle of the jetty in Dad's sketch matched the ruins of the pier outside. The notation North Ridge on his drawing corresponded perfectly to the dune line on the satellite map. Dad hadn't just dreamed of a resort near here. He had designed it for this specific lot. My hands shook as I turned the pages. I found a date scribbled in the margin. August 12, 1998. Meeting with seller postponed. G says he will handle it. August 1998. I was 10 years old. Graham was 15. But G likely referred to Graham, even then. Or maybe grandfather? No. Grandfather was dead by then. I needed answers. I drove to my mother's house. It was late, past 8 in the evening. Eleanor was surprised to see me. She was watching television in the den, looking small in the overstuffed armchair. "Mom, I need to ask you something," I said, sitting on the ottoman in front of her. She looked nervous immediately. "Hazel, if this is about Graham, it is about Dad," I said, "and the marina at Cape Eddings." Her face went pale. She reached for the remote and muted the TV. "What about it?" she whispered. "I found his sketches. Mom, he wanted to buy that land. He had a plan for it. What happened?" Eleanor looked away. She picked at a loose thread on the armrest. "He loved that spot," she said softly. "He said the water was different there, cleaner. He had a deal lined up. It was going to be his big break, his own project, away from the partners. And," I pressed, "he lost the financing," she said, "at the last minute. Why?" Eleanor closed her eyes. A tear leaked out. "Graham," she said. My stomach twisted. Graham was just a teenager then. Not Graham directly, she corrected quickly, but Graham had gotten into trouble at school. A fight. A bad one. The family had to use resources to make it go away. Dad missed a critical meeting with the bank because he was dealing with the headmaster. And then, Graham insisted on helping. He said he would deliver the papers to the seller. She looked at me, her eyes full of ancient regret. Dad let him go. He trusted him. Graham came back and said the seller had changed his mind, that he had sold to someone else. Dad was crushed. He never really tried to build on his own again. I sat there, stunned. The timeline made sense, but the implication was horrific. "Mom, did Dad ever verify that the seller changed his mind?" She shook her head. "He was too depressed. He just let it go." I stood up and paced the room. "Graham killed the deal." I said, "He didn't deliver the papers. Or he said something to the seller. He sabotaged Dad." "Hazel, you cannot know that," Eleanor cried. "That was years ago. Graham was a boy. He was a shark even then." I said, He saw Dad getting independent, and he didn't like it, or maybe he just wanted the power of knowing he could stop it. I looked at my mother. She knew. Deep down, she knew. That was why she was so terrified of Graham now. She had watched him cut his own father down. I am going to build it. Mom, I said, I am going to build what Dad wanted. And Graham is not going to stop me this time. I left her crying softly in the blue light of the television. The revelation fueled me. This wasn't just business anymore. It was a resurrection. Work on the site accelerated. Tomas Red, my disheveled attorney, was working miracles with the state agencies. We were on track to get the remediation plan approved, but money was tight. We were burning through Ivor's seed cash on surveys and legal fees. Then, a temptation arrived. One of the subcontractors, a man named Miller who ran a framing crew, pulled me aside during a site walk. "Ms. Watson," he said, chewing on a toothpick, "I have been looking at the specs for the boardwalk. You have got us using union carpenters for the whole stretch. That is the agreement." I said, "Local hire, fair wage." Miller spat the toothpick out. "Look, I can bring in a crew from out of state. Cash under the table. They work fast. We can cut the labor cost by 30% and shave 2 weeks off the schedule. No one has to know. The inspector is a buddy of mine." I looked at him. 30%. That was $50,000 I could use for landscaping, for marketing, for a cushion against Graham, and 2 weeks meant I would open sooner. It was so easy. Just a nod, just a look the other way. I thought about Graham. That was how he built. Fast, cheap, and hidden. I thought about the man in the union cap at the town hall. If I break these promises, I want you to shut me down. I looked Miller in the eye. "No," I said. Miller frowned. "Ms. Watson, you are bleeding money here. I am trying to help you. You help me by following the contract." I said, my voice hard. "We use the local crew. We pay the prevailing wage. And if I hear about you cutting corners on safety or labor again, you are off the site. Do you understand?" Miller stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. "It is your funeral, lady." "It is my resort," I said. I chose the slower path. I chose the expensive path. It hurt the spreadsheet, but it saved my soul. And as it turned out, it saved the project. A week later, a state labor inspector did a surprise audit. If I had hired Miller's shadow crew, I would have been shut down and fined into oblivion. Graham's influence, no doubt. He was testing the perimeter, looking for a weak spot. He didn't find one. The 90-day deadline approached. The remediation plan was approved. The financing for the construction loan was conditionally approved by a private equity group Ivor had introduced me to. I walked into the lawyer's office to sign the final purchase agreement. I signed the check for the balance of the land cost. "It is done," the escrow officer said, stamping the deed. "Lot 402 belongs to Salt Glass Hospitality." I felt a rush of pure adrenaline. I owned it. It was mine. The dream was real. I walked out of the office, squinting into the sunlight. I wanted to call Mara. I wanted to call Mom. A black car pulled up to the curb. A man in a cheap suit got out. "Hazel Watson?" he asked. "Yes." He thrust a thick envelope into my hands. "You have been served." He got back in the car and drove away. My heart hammered. I tore open the envelope right there on the sidewalk. It was a legal summons. Plaintiff, Coastal Horizon Holdings, LLC Defendant, Salt Glass Hospitality Group and Hazel Watson, cause of action, theft of intellectual property, unfair competition, breach of fiduciary duty. I scanned the document, my breath coming in short gasps. The lawsuit alleged that the design for the Edding Shore Resort was based on proprietary concepts developed by the Watson family estate, and that I, as a former beneficiary of the estate, had stolen them to launch a competing venture. They were claiming Dad's ideas belonged to the family trust, and since Graham controlled the trust, he was claiming he owned my resort. I looked at the law firm representing the plaintiff, Sterling Hearth, the most expensive, aggressive firm in the state, Graham's personal attack dogs. I stood there, clutching the deed in one hand and the lawsuit in the other. I had won the land, but the war had just gone nuclear. He wasn't just trying to stop me anymore. He was trying to steal what I had built, claiming it was his birthright. I looked at the legal notice, and a cold fury settled over me. "You want to fight? Graham?" I whispered. "I will give you a war." The lawsuit from Coastal Horizon Holdings was exactly what Graham intended it to be, a paper tiger with very sharp teeth. My legal team, led by a sharp-edged litigator named Sarah Vance, whom I had hired on contingency, sat around the folding table in my bakery-top office. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and stress. "This is a nuisance suit." "Hazel," Sarah said, tapping the thick stack of documents, "the intellectual property claim is baseless. You cannot copyright a generic idea for a resort, and they have no proof you accessed any specific trade secrets held by the trust. We will win this." I looked at the paperwork. I knew we would win, but I also knew how long winning took. "How long?" I asked. Sarah hesitated. 6 months to get a dismissal. Maybe a year if they drag out discovery. And in the meantime? In the meantime, it is a matter of public record. It is a red flag. The red flag was already waving. 2 hours later, I received a call from the private equity group Ivor Dane had introduced me to. They were pulling the construction financing. They cited pending litigation as a breach of their risk threshold. Just like that, $3 million evaporated. I sat in my chair, the phone receiver feeling heavy in my hand. I had the land. I had the permits pending. I had the remediation crews ready to start digging in 48 hours. And now, I had no way to pay them. Ivor Dane called me that evening. "You are in a bind," he said. His voice was not sympathetic. It was factual. "I am," I admitted. "The lawsuit spooked the equity partners." "I can bridge the gap for a month," Ivor said, "but I won't fund the whole construction. You need skin in the game. Hazel, you need to show me you are not going to fold just because your brother hired a fancy law firm." I hung up and looked around my condo. It was a beautiful place, a 2-bedroom unit with a view of the harbor. I had bought it with the earnings from my most successful consulting year. It was my sanctuary. It was the one thing I owned that Graham had never touched. I called a real estate agent friend 10 minutes later. "List it," I said. "Hazel, the market is soft," she warned. "You won't get top dollar." "I do not need top dollar," I said, my voice steady. "I need a cash offer with a 10-day close. Sell it." I sold my sanctuary for 10% under market value. I packed my life into 20 cardboard boxes and moved into a rental property on the outskirts of Cape Eddings. It was a small, weather-beaten cottage with drafty windows and a heating system that rattled like a dying engine. The shower pressure was non-existent, and the kitchen smelled permanently of boiled cabbage from the previous tenant, but it was 5 minutes from the construction site. I unpacked my clothes, hung my father's sketch on the peeling drywall, and looked in the mirror. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes that concealer could no longer hide. But I also looked dangerous. I had burned the ships. There was no retreat now. The next morning, I was on site before the sun came up. The remediation work had to begin immediately to meet the tax credit deadline. Mara Klein was already there, reviewing a stack of bids for the electrical and plumbing subcontracts. She looked angry. "Look at this," she said, shoving a clipboard at me. I scanned the numbers. 3 bids for the electrical work. 2 were within the standard range. 1 was absurdly low. A company called Apex Systems had bid 40% below the market rate. "They cannot do the work for that price," I said. "The materials alone cost more than that." "Exactly," Mara said. "So either they are stealing copper wire, or they are planning to hit us with a mountain of change orders once they are on the job, or they are planted." I finished. I looked at the company name. Apex Systems. It was generic, bland. I did a quick search on my phone. Apex Systems had been incorporated 3 months ago. The registered agent was a lawyer in the state capital. "If we hire them," I said, thinking aloud, "they will get on site. Then they will stall. They will find unforeseen conditions. They will miss inspections. They will bleed the clock until my financing expires. It is a Trojan horse," Mara said. "Someone is trying to infiltrate the operations." "Reject the bid," I said. But the other bids are higher, Mara argued. We are tight on cash. Hazel, I don't care, I said. We pay the fair price for honest work. If we let a saboteur inside the fence, we are dead. Hire the local guys. The ones who live here, the ones who have to look their neighbors in the eye at the grocery store. We hired a local firm, Miller Sons, not the Miller who tried to bribe me, but his cousin's outfit which had a reputation for being slow but honest. I realized then that the war with Graham wasn't just going to be fought in courtrooms, it was going to be fought in the dirt. He was trying to break the project physically. I needed allies. I couldn't just be the developer on the hill. I needed to be part of the town's immune system. I started attending the Tuesday night town council meetings, not to speak, but to listen. I met with the Coastal Preservation Group, a band of retired teachers and fishermen who monitored the dune erosion. They were skeptical of me at first. You are just going to put up a seawall and divert the waves onto the public beach. The group's president, a stern woman named Mrs. Higgins, told me, that is what the developers always do. No seawall. I said, we are using living shorelines, oyster reefs and native grasses to stabilize the sand. It costs me more, but it protects the whole cove. I showed her the plans. I brought Tomas Red, my environmental lawyer, to explain the science. Slowly, the skepticism turned into cautious curiosity. Then the storm came. It was a nor'easter, hitting in late October. The meteorologists predicted a direct hit on Cape Eddings. The town boarded up. The fishing fleet tied down extra lines. At the construction site, we scrambled to secure the equipment. The wind was already howling, whipping sand into our eyes. I stayed at the site until the last possible moment, helping Mara and the crew lash down the temporary fencing. The rain was coming sideways, stinging like needles. Go home, Hazel. Mara shouted over the wind. We have done all we can. I drove back to my drafty rental cottage and sat in the dark, listening to the roof groan under the assault. The power went out at midnight. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would wake up to find my $95 million dream washed out to sea. The storm broke by morning. The sky was a bruised purple, but the wind had died down. I drove to the site. The damage was manageable. Some fencing down, some flooding in the foundation pits. But the structure held. The living shoreline concept had worked. The dunes were intact, but the town hadn't fared as well. The old municipal pier, the heart of the fishing community, had taken a beating. A 30-foot section of the decking had been ripped away. The access road was washed out. I saw the town manager and a group of fishermen standing by the wreckage, looking defeated. The town budget was already stretched thin. Repairs would take months. I walked over. My boots crunched on the debris. How bad is it? I asked. Bad. The town manager said, we cannot get the trucks out to the end of the pier to offload the catch. The fleet is grounded until we fix this. I looked at my own site. We had excavators. We had gravel. We had crews. Mara, I called out. She walked over, wiping grease from her hands. Pull the road crew off our entry drive. I said, get them over here. Fill the washout on the access road, and get the carpenters to secure the pier decking. Hazel, Mara warned quietly, that is not our land, and we are paying those guys by the hour. That is $10,000 of work you are giving away. Do it, I said. Put it on my tab. We spent 3 days fixing the town's pier. I paid for the materials. I paid for the labor. I was out there myself, hauling lumber and passing out coffee to the volunteers. I didn't do it for the press. I didn't call the newspaper. I did it because these were my neighbors. And if they couldn't work, the town died. And if the town died, my resort was nothing but a palace in a graveyard. But the town noticed. Mrs. Higgins brought me a thermos of soup. The fisherman nodded to me when I walked by. The outsider label began to fade. I was becoming Hazel, the woman who fixed the road. While the physical work continued, I kept pulling at the thread of the lawsuit. I spent my nights in the rental cottage, surrounded by boxes, digging into the corporate structure of Coastal Horizon Holdings. It was a shell company, registered in Delaware. No employees, no website, just a mailbox. But I found a filing error. In one of the annual reports, the contact email listed wasn't the lawyer's generic address. It was Admin Watson Coastal Trust, org. My breath hitched. The shell company suing me was using the same administrative backend as the family charity. I kept digging. I looked at the Watson Trust's Public 990 tax forms. They listed millions in grant allocations to various organizations. Most were legitimate, but there was a recurring grant to a Horizon Strategic Fund. I traced the Horizon Strategic Fund. It was a donor-advised fund, a black box of philanthropy where the donor could direct where the money went without public disclosure. Graham was moving money from the family trust into this donor-advised fund, and from there, it was flowing into the shell company that was suing me. He was using tax-exempt charitable dollars to fund a legal war against his sister. It was brilliant, and it was illegal. I needed to prove it, but I couldn't go to the police yet. I needed more than a filing error. I needed the internal communications. Meanwhile, Graham was escalating the social pressure. He announced the autumn gala at the Halcyon Maritime Club. The invitation was thick cardstock with gold leaf. The theme was Preserving Our Heritage. I was not invited, obviously. But I saw the coverage in the Bracken Herald. Graham gave a speech. He stood at the podium, looking tan and confident. "We must protect our coast from predatory development," he had told the crowd. "We cannot let our history be paved over by cheap boardwalks and discount resorts that threaten the character of our community." He was mocking my project. He was framing me as the predator. While he stood there in a tuxedo bought with inherited money, but his attacks weren't just rhetorical. 2 days later, the county permit office called. My final occupancy permit, the one I needed to start booking guests for the spring opening, was being held for review. Why? I asked the clerk. "We passed every inspection. The zoning commissioner has concerns about traffic impact," the clerk said nervously. "He wants a new study. A new study would take 3 months. It would bankrupt me." I knew the zoning commissioner. He was a regular at the Halcyon. Graham had gotten to him. I hung up the phone. I felt a surge of panic. This was the chokehold. If I couldn't open, I couldn't pay back the bridge loan Ivor had given me. I would default, and Ivor would take the property. Graham would win without ever stepping foot on the site. "No," I said to the empty room. I called Tomas Red. "File a request for a public hearing." I said, "Hazel, that is risky." Tomas said, "If we go public, the commissioner can deny it on the record." "File it," I said, "and tell them I am invoking the Community Impact Clause." The hearing was set for a Tuesday night. The town hall was packed. Graham's influence was heavy in the room. The zoning commissioner, a man named Henderson, sat behind the dais looking bored and annoyed. "Ms. Watson," Henderson said, looking over his glasses. "This hearing is irregular. The traffic concerns are valid." "They are not valid," I said, standing at the microphone. "We submitted 3 independent studies. They all show the impact is negligible. This delay isn't about traffic." "Then what is it about?" Henderson challenged. "It is about gatekeeping." I said. I turned to the room. "I am trying to open a business that employs 50 locals. I am trying to open a shoreline that has been closed for decades, and I am being blocked by a bureaucracy that seems to answer to a private club rather than the public good." Henderson banged his gavel. "Ms. Watson, stick to the traffic study." "I will stick to the traffic." A voice boomed from the back. It was the union foreman who had challenged me in part 2. He stood up. "I drive the trucks," he said. "The traffic is fine. You know what is not fine? My guy's sitting at home because you are sitting on a permit." Then Mrs. Higgins stood up. She fixed the pier. "Henderson," she said sharply. "When the town was under water, she was there. Where were you? You were at a fundraiser." A murmur went through the room. More people stood up. Shop owners, fishermen, people who had seen the work we were doing. "Give her the damn permit." Someone shouted. Henderson looked at the crowd. He looked at the other council members, who were shifting uncomfortably. He realized he had lost the room. If he denied me now, it would be political suicide. "The permit is granted," he muttered, banging the gavel. pending final review of the signage. The room erupted. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for weeks. I had beaten Graham at his own game. I had used the community he ignored to crush the influence he wielded. After the hearing, I walked out into the cool night air. My hands were shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting me hard. Nice speech. I turned. Leaning against a lamppost was Elliot Price. I hadn't seen Elliot since high school. He had been the quiet kid in the back of AP Physics, the one who always smelled like salt water and engine grease. Now, he was taller, broader. He wore a flannel shirt and work boots, and he had a beard that was trimmed but rugged. He was a coastal engineer now, one of the best in the state. "Elliot," I said, a smile breaking through my exhaustion. "I didn't know you were here. I came for the show," he said, pushing off the post, and to see if the rumors were true. "What rumors?" "That Hazel Watson had gone rogue and joined the working class?" I laughed. It felt good to laugh. "I am not rogue," I said. "I am just untethered." He walked me to my car. It was a comfortable silence. Elliot didn't demand anything. He didn't look at me with pity or calculation. He just looked at me. "I saw the work you did on the pier," he said. "That was solid engineering. Most people would have just patched the top. You reinforced the pilings. I wanted it to last," I said. He stopped by my car door. "You look tired." "Hazel." "I am," I admitted. "If you need a second set of eyes on the storm water management for the resort, let me know," he said. "I know the drainage patterns in this basin better than anyone." "Are you offering a discount?" I teased. "I am offering a favor," he said, serious. "For the town, and maybe for the girl who used to let me copy her history notes." He smiled, and for a moment, the war with Graham felt very far away. "I might take you up on that," I said. I drove home feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time, but the warmth was short-lived. When I got to the cottage, there was a package wedged between the screen door and the frame. It wasn't from Amazon. It was a plain brown envelope, taped shut, no return address. I took it inside and locked the door. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Inside was a stack of printed emails. They were internal communications from the Watson Coastal Giving Trust. I started reading. My blood ran cold. From Graham Watson. Board of Directors. Subject: Allocation for Project Horizon. The funds need to be moved by Friday. Route it through the consultant group as a feasibility study. We need to keep the liquidity high for the upcoming acquisition. From Treasurer to Graham Watson. Subject: Allocation Graham. This is the third transfer this month. If the audit committee looks at the invoices, they will see there is no work being done. The consultant is a shell. From Graham Watson. Treasurer. Subject: Allocation. Do not worry about the audit. I have handled the documentation. Just move the money. We are leveraging the charitable assets to cover the private debt service on the Halcyon expansion. It is a bridge loan. Effectively, he was looting the charity. He was using the trust's money to pay debts for the club, or for himself. It was embezzlement. Massive, systemic embezzlement. But then I turned to the last page. It was a draft of a document titled Strategic Reorganization Liability Assignment. It was a plan to spin off the toxic assets of the trust, the shell companies, the bad debt, into a new entity. And listed as the primary signatory and director of special projects for this new, toxic entity was a single name: Hazel Watson. I stared at my name typed in bold letters. He wasn't just suing me. He wasn't just blocking me. He was setting me up. He was planning to dump all the illegal activity, all the debt, and all the liability onto me. He was going to frame me as the architect of the fraud, the do not admit memo, the public humiliation. It was all part of a narrative. Hazel is desperate. Hazel is unstable. Hazel needed money, so she cooked the books. The note I had received in part 1 flashed in my mind. He is doing this because you are closer than you think. I wasn't just close to the truth. I was the escape hatch. I looked out the window into the darkness. The wind was picking up again, rattling the loose frame. I was holding the smoking gun, but the gun was pointed at me. The whistleblower packet sat on my kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. For 3 nights, I did not sleep. I sat in the drafty living room of my rental cottage, listening to the wind rattle the loose window frames, staring at the pages that detailed my brother's crimes. The temptation to run to the police immediately was overwhelming. It was right there in black and white. Graham was funneling money from the Watson Coastal Giving Trust into a labyrinth of shell companies to service his own debts, and he was preparing to frame me as the architect of the scheme. But I held back. I held back because I was a Watson, and I had been trained since birth that the family name was a currency more valuable than gold. If I exposed Graham, I would not just destroy him, I would destroy the trust, which supported the local hospital and the library. I would humiliate my mother, who had built her entire fragile identity around the respectability of her husband's legacy, and there was a darker fear. If I went to the authorities with a packet of stolen emails and no context, Graham's lawyers, the sharks at Sterling Hearth, would spin it. They would say I forged them. They would say I was a disgruntled sister trying to blackmail her successful brother. Without a forensic trail to back up the emails, I was just a woman with a grudge and a pile of paper. I needed bulletproof armor. I found that armor in the form of Nina Shore. Nina was a forensic accountant who operated out of a converted loft in the city, 2 hours south. She did not look like an accountant. She had sharp, geometric glasses and a sleeve of tattoos visible under her rolled-up silk blouse. She had a reputation for finding money that did not want to be found. I met her on a rainy Tuesday morning, laying the whistleblower packet on her glass desk. "I need you to trace this," I said. "I need to know where the money started, where it went, and most importantly, I need you to prove that I never touched a dime of it." Nina flipped through the pages. Her face was a mask of professional boredom, but her eyes were darting back and forth, absorbing the data. "This is a classic layering scheme," she said, her voice dry. "Charity money goes to a donor-advised fund. Fund pays a consulting firm for services rendered. Consulting firm pays a vendor. Vendor kicks back to an offshore entity." She looked up at me. "And you are the patsy?" "According to the draft documents in the back." "Yes," I said. "I am listed as the director of the consulting firm. Did you sign any of these?" she asked. "No. Does your brother have access to your signature? Old documents? Powers of attorney?" I felt a cold shiver. "I do not know. Maybe." Nina closed the folder. "I take a $5,000 retainer, up front, and I charge $300 an hour. If this is as deep as I think it is going to get expensive." I wrote the check. It came out of the construction contingency fund, which was already dangerously low. I told myself it was a construction cost. I was building a defense wall. While Nina dug into the digital grave of the Watson Trust, I threw myself into the physical reality of the Edding Shore Resort. The project had evolved. It was no longer just about proving Graham wrong. It had become something living, something that breathed on its own. The initial concept of membership-free luxury had sharpened into a philosophy I called ethical luxury. We weren't just building a hotel, we were building an ecosystem. I worked with the architects to redesign the lobby, turning it into a conservation learning center open to the public, displaying the history of the local ecology. We added a public boardwalk that wove through the dunes, labeled with information about the native grasses we were restoring. But the biggest shift was internal. I called a meeting with the 50 staff members we had hired for the pre-opening phase: construction leads, housekeeping supervisors, the kitchen crew. We stood in the unfinished shell of the main dining room, surrounded by sawdust and the smell of fresh paint. I stood on a crate so they could see me. "We open in 2 months," I said, "and I know the rumors. You hear that we are underfunded. You hear that my brother is trying to shut us down." There was a murmur of assent. They knew. In a small town, everyone knew. "I want to make something clear," I continued. "This isn't just a job. This is a partnership. As of today, I am implementing a profit-sharing structure. 5% of the net operating profit of this resort goes into a pool for the staff. If we win, you win." The room went silent. Profit sharing was unheard of in the seasonal hospitality industry. Most owners squeezed every cent out of their labor force. "I am not asking for your time," I said. "I am asking for your best. I want this to be the place where people want to work." When I stepped down, the energy in the room had shifted. It wasn't just a paycheck anymore. It was their resort, too. That afternoon, Mara Klein found me in the site trailer. She looked grim. "We have a problem." "Hazel." My stomach dropped. "What is it? The plumbing? The permits? The safety logs?" Mara said. She threw a binder onto my desk. "I keep a duplicate log of the crane inspections in my truck. Just a habit. This morning, I checked the official site log, the one we have to show the state inspector next week." She flipped the binder open. Someone tore out the page from last Thursday, the day we had the high winds, and they replaced it with a fresh sheet, forged with the crane operator's signature, saying the wind speed was within limits. I stared at the page. If the crane had operated in high winds, it was a violation. If we hit it, it was a crime. If an accident happened later, that forged page would be evidence of negligence. "Who has access to the logs?" I asked. "The foreman, the safety officer, and the night security." Mara said. Graham had reached someone. He was trying to plant a safety violation, or worse, set us up for an accident that would look like we had cut corners. "Report it," I said immediately. Mara looked surprised. "You want me to report a violation on our own site? The state will shut us down for a week to investigate. I do not care." I said, "We call the state board today. We tell them we found a discrepancy in our own logs and we suspect tampering. We invite them in. But the delay—" Mara started. "Mara," I said, leaning forward, "my brother wants to paint me as reckless. He wants to say I am dangerous. The only way to fight that is to be so transparent it hurts. We do not hide anything. We self-reported." The state inspector arrived the next day, suspicious and grumpy, but when we showed him the duplicate logs and the forged page, his attitude changed. He realized we weren't covering up. We were cleaning house. We lost 3 days of crane work, but we gained a reputation with the state board as the most rigorous site on the coast. It was a small victory, but the war was getting louder. 2 days later, I was leaving the grocery store, juggling bags of apples and coffee, when a woman in a trench coat stepped into my path. "Hazel Watson?" she asked. I tightened my grip on the bags. "Yes, I am Jessica Tate. I write for the Bracken Herald." I started walking toward my car. No comment. Ms. Tate kept pace with me. "I am not looking for a quote about the traffic study. Hazel, I am writing a profile on the Watson family. I have heard stories about what happened at the Halcyon Club, about the scene your brother made." I stopped at my trunk and unlocked it. "I have nothing to say about that. People are talking," she pressed. "They say there is a feud. They say you are building this resort out of spite. I want to give you a chance to tell your side. If your brother cut you off, people will be sympathetic." I looked at her. It was so tempting. To tell the world that Graham was a bully, that he had humiliated me, that he was trying to ruin me, it would feel good. But I thought about Nina Shore. I thought about the delicate web of finance I was trying to unravel. If I went to the press now, Graham would panic. And when men like Graham panicked, they destroyed the evidence. This isn't a personal story. "Ms. Tate," I said, loading my groceries, "it is a business story. I am building a resort. That is the only story I have to tell." I slammed the trunk and drove away. The next week, Nina Shore called me. Her voice was tight. "I found something." She said, "Did you trace the shell company?" I asked, holding the phone to my ear as I paced the length of the boardwalk. "I did," she said, "but that is the small fish. Hazel, I know why Graham is doing this. I know why he is desperate." "Why?" "He is broke," Nina said. "That is impossible," I said. "The family trust is worth $50 million. The club is profitable. The trust is asset-rich, but cash-poor," Nina explained. "And the club? The club has been bleeding money for 5 years. Membership is down. Maintenance costs are up. But Graham couldn't let the veneer crack. He has been borrowing. Borrowing from who? That is the scary part, Nina said. He maxed out the commercial lines of credit 2 years ago. Since then, he has been taking loans from private equity lenders. Hard money. I found a promissory note to a group called Vantage Capital. I froze. I knew Vantage Capital. They weren't a bank. They were loan sharks in Armani suits. They lent money to desperate developers at 18% interest. And if you missed a payment, they didn't send a letter. They took your collateral. He put up the influence as collateral. Nina said, "What do you mean?" "I mean, he promised them access." Hazel. I found emails between Graham and the Vantage partners. He is promising to fast-track their zoning applications for other projects in the county. He is using his seat on the charity board to grease wheels for them. He is selling the town to pay off his debts. My head spun. It made sense. The desperation, the sloppiness. He needed cash flow to service the hard money loans. So he was looting the charity, and he needed a fall guy in case the regulators looked too closely. And the resort? I asked. My resort? If you open and succeed, you devalue the Halcyon Club, Nina said. You pull away the high-end clientele. If the club's valuation drops, his collateral creates a margin call. He loses everything. He needs you to fail. Hazel, not just for his ego, for his survival. I hung up the phone and sat on the bench overlooking the ocean. The wind was cold, biting through my jacket. Graham wasn't a king. He was a drowning man, and he was trying to climb on top of me to keep his head above water. I needed to confirm the final piece of the puzzle. I needed to know how he planned to pin it on me. I drove to my mother's house. Eleanor was in the garden, deadheading the roses. She looked older than she had a month ago. Her hands trembled as she held the shears. "Mom," I said, unlatching the gate. She looked up, startled. "Hazel, you look intense. We need to talk. Inside." We sat in the sunroom. I declined the tea she offered. "Mom," I asked gently, "do you sign documents for Graham?" She avoided my eyes. "Of course. There is always paperwork for the estate. Tax forms, trust maintenance. Do you read them?" I asked. She laughed nervously. "Oh, Hazel, you know I do not understand that legalese. Graham explains it to me. He says, 'Sign here. Mom, it is to protect the family assets.' So I sign." I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the draft document from the whistleblower packet. It was the formation document for the Toxic Shell Company. "Mom, look at this." She squinted at the paper. "I see your signature here, on the witness line." I said, "Do you remember signing this?" She looked at the date. "Last month?" "I think so. Graham said it was a restructuring, to lower our tax burden. And did he tell you that this document names me as the director of a company I have never heard of?" Eleanor went pale. She dropped the paper. "No," she whispered. He said it was just administrative." I took her hand. It was ice cold. "Mom, he is stealing from the trust, and he is setting me up to take the blame. He used your signature to validate it." Eleanor started to cry. Not the polite, silent weeping she usually did. This was a ragged, gasping sob. "He told me I had to trust him." She wailed. "He said you were unstable. He said we had to protect the money from your reckless ideas. He lied to you." "Mom, I know," she cried. "I know he lies. I have known for years." The confession hung in the air. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. "The day your father died," she said, her voice shaking. "Graham came to the hospital. You were in the cafeteria getting coffee. He brought a notary. He made me sign papers transferring the voting rights of the trust to him. He said Dad wanted it that way, but Dad couldn't speak. He was already gone." I felt a surge of nausea. He had seized power over his father's still warm body. "Why didn't you stop him?" I asked. "Because I was scared," she whispered. "I was scared of being alone. And Graham, he looks so much like your father. But he isn't him." She gripped my hand. "He is ruining us, isn't he?" "Yes, Mom." I said, "He is." I left her there, promising I would fix it. But I knew I couldn't fix it from the outside. I had to go to the source. I drove straight to the Watson Coastal Giving Trust's office. It was a renovated historic building downtown, polished brick and glass. I walked past the receptionist without stopping. "Ms. Watson, you cannot go in there," she called out. I pushed open the double doors to Graham's office. He was on the phone, standing by the window looking out at the harbor. He turned as I slammed the door shut. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. He hung up the phone and put it in his pocket. "Hello? Hazel, I see you have upgraded your wardrobe. That jacket looks expensive." I stood in the center of the room. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I felt a strange, cold calm. "I know about Vantage Capital." "Graham," his smile flickered. "Just for a second. I do not know what you are talking about." "I know about the 18% interest," I said. "I know about the fast-tracked zoning for their projects. And I know you are funneling the trust's money through the Horizon Fund to pay them." Graham walked over to his desk and sat down. He leaned back, tenting his fingers. "You have a vivid imagination." "Hazel, that sounds like a conspiracy theory. I have the emails." "Graham." I saw his jaw tighten. The charm began to dissolve, revealing the jagged edge beneath. "So what?" he said, his voice dropping. "You have some emails. Who are you going to show them to? The police? And destroy Mom?" He laughed. "You won't do it. You are too soft. You always were. That is why Dad never trusted you with the business. Dad didn't trust me because you poisoned him against me." I said, "You sabotaged the Marina deal in '98. You intercepted his mail. You have been cutting the brake lines on my life since I was 10 years old." Graham stood up abruptly. His chair hit the wall with a bang. "Because you would have taken it," he shouted. The veneer of control shattered. "You were always the smart one. Hazel." He spat the words like a curse. "You were the one with the grades. You were the one with the ideas. If I let you in, if I gave you an inch, you would have taken the whole damn thing." He walked around the desk, his face flushed. "I did what I had to do. I protected my inheritance. It is mine. I earned it. I kept this family afloat while you were playing house with your little consulting gigs. You didn't keep it afloat." I said quietly, "You drowned it. You are broke, Graham, and you are terrified." He stopped inches from my face. I could smell the stale coffee and the fear coming off him. "I am not broke," he hissed. "I am leveraging. That is what businessmen do. And you? You are a nuisance, a temporary glitch." He leaned in, his eyes dead and cold. "Go ahead. Release the emails. Burn the family down. See if anyone believes you. By the time the investigation is over, your little resort will be bankrupt, and you will be in prison for embezzlement. I have the paperwork. Hazel, I have the signatures. You are the director of the shell company. You are the one moving the money." I looked at him. I saw the deep, pathetic insecurity that drove him. He wasn't a monster. He was a small, frightened boy who had built a castle out of lies and was willing to kill anyone who tried to look at the foundation. "You are right," I said. "I might go down, but I won't go down alone." I turned and walked to the door. "Hazel," he called out. His voice shifted again, back to the smooth, brotherly charm. It was terrifying. "Hazel, wait. We can work this out. I can help you with the resort financing. We can merge the assets. Just bring me the emails. We are family." I didn't look back. I walked out. I went straight to Sarah Vance's office. I told her everything. I told her about the debt, the mother's confession, the confrontation. Sarah looked pale. "Hazel, this is dangerous," she said. "If Graham knows you have the emails, he is going to accelerate the timeline. He is going to trigger the trap." "What do I do?" I asked. "We need to get ahead of it," she said. "We need to file a preemptive complaint with the Attorney General. But what? If we invite the regulators in, they are going to tear everything apart," Sarah warned. "The trust, the shell companies, and you. If your name is on those documents, even if they are forged, you are a suspect. Your resort accounts will be frozen. Your investors will flee. You have to prove you are clean down to the last invoice. If there is one missing receipt, one discrepancy, They will lump you in with him. I thought about the profit-sharing plan. I thought about the safety logs we had self-reported. I had built Salt Glass on a foundation of obsessive transparency. I am clean. I said, "Are you sure?" Sarah asked. "Because once we ring this bell, we cannot unring it. I am sure." I drove back to the rental cottage. I felt lighter, but also terrified. I was about to drop a nuclear weapon on my own family. I parked the car and walked up the path. I saw a figure standing on the porch. It was the same process server who had delivered the lawsuit in Part 2. He looked apologetic this time. "Ms. Watson?" "Yes, I have a subpoena for you." I took the envelope. "Is this for the civil suit?" I asked. "No, ma'am," he said. "This is from the district attorney's office." My heart stopped. I opened the envelope. Subpoena duces tecum to Hazel Watson regarding investigation into financial misconduct at Watson Coastal, giving trust and affiliated entities. You are hereby commanded to produce all financial records, bank statements, and communications related to Salt Glass Hospitality Group and Horizon Strategic Fund. It wasn't a subpoena for Graham. It was for me. Graham hadn't waited. He had beaten me to the punch. He had gone to the authorities first, or he had tipped them off anonymously, painting me as the suspect. He had spun the narrative that I was the one looting the charity to fund my resort. The note on the document listed me as a person of interest. I stood on the porch, clutching the paper. The wind howled around me. Graham had set the trap, and I had just walked right into it. The subpoena felt heavy in my hand, a physical weight that seemed to pull my arm down toward the floorboards of the porch. It was a command to produce records, but it read like an accusation. Person of interest. Graham had flipped the board. He was no longer just defending his fortress. He was firing cannons at mine. My lawyer, Sarah Vance, arrived at the rental cottage an hour later. She read the document under the harsh light of the kitchen table. "This is a fishing expedition." "Hazel," she said, tossing the paper down. "The district attorney is looking for a connection between your accounts and the trust's hemorrhaging funds. Graham must have fed them a narrative that you were siphoning money to build the resort. We can quash it," I said. "We can fight the scope. We can?" Sarah agreed. "We can file motions to delay. We can claim proprietary business privilege. We can keep them out of your books for 6 months. 6 months, I repeated. If I fought this, the cloud of suspicion would hang over the resort through the grand opening. The investors would smell the smoke. The vendors would get nervous. Graham would win by attrition. "No," I said. Sarah looked at me. "No, I am not fighting it," I said, standing up. "I am not going to act like a woman with something to hide. If I fight, I look guilty. If I open the door, I look fearless. I want radical transparency." "Sarah, call the district attorney. Tell them they do not need a subpoena. Tell them I am volunteering. They can have everything. The bank statements, the vendor contracts, the emails, the receipts for every single nail and 2x4. Hazel," Sarah warned, "that is suicide. If you have one clerical error, one missing invoice—" "I do not have errors," I said. "I have been obsessive. Let them come. Let them tear the place apart." The next morning, the auditors arrived. They were not the standard tax accountants. These were forensic specialists from the state, accompanied by a grim-faced deputy from the district attorney's office. I set them up in the construction trailer. I gave them the passwords to our cloud accounting. I gave them the physical binders. "Here is everything," I said. For the next 2 weeks, the Salt Glass site was a war zone of paperwork. The auditors interviewed my staff. They cross-referenced the cost of lumber with market rates. They called my suppliers to verify delivery dates. It was exhausting. It was invasive. Every time they frowned at a screen, my heart stopped, wondering if Graham had managed to plant a fake invoice despite my vigilance. But the real damage was the time. While the investigation was active, the county halted our final inspections. The building department refused to issue the certificate of occupancy until the legal status of the ownership was resolved. The calendar on the wall mocked me. Grand opening, May 1st. We were 3 weeks away. Without the certificate of occupancy, I could not legally let a guest sleep in a bed. I could not open the kitchen. The cancellation clauses in our vendor contracts began to trigger. The linen company sent a notice of penalty for delayed delivery. The landscaping crew threatened to walk. I sat in the trailer, watching the auditors pack up their boxes on a rainy Thursday. "Well?" I asked the lead auditor, a man named Mr. Henderson. He looked at me over his glasses. "You are clean, Ms. Watson." Frustratingly so. "We traced every dollar. Your capital came from Ivor Dane and your own liquidation of assets. There is no flow from the Watson Trust." I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for a month. "So I am cleared?" "From a forensic standpoint, yes," he said. "We will file our report, but the report would take days to process. And then the building department would take another week to reschedule the final walkthrough." I did the math. We would miss the opening by 10 days. I walked out to the unfinished boardwalk. The rain was misty and cold. I looked at the resort. It was beautiful. The cedar siding was weathering to a soft gray. The glass caught the light. It was ready, but it was paralyzed by red tape. Elliot Price found me there. He was wearing a yellow hard hat and holding a roll of blueprints. "I heard the auditors are leaving," he said. "They are?" I said. "But the damage is done. The county says they cannot get an inspector out here for the final life safety check for another 2 weeks. We are going to miss the opening." "Elliot, if we miss the opening, I default on the bridge loan performance covenants." Elliot unrolled the blueprints on the railing, shielding them from the mist. "You do not need the county inspector," he said. I looked at him. "What?" "There is a provision in the state building code," Elliot said. "Section 107, subsection C. If the municipal authority is unable to perform an inspection within 48 hours of a request due to backlog or administrative delay, the owner is entitled to hire a certified third-party peer reviewer." He tapped the paper. "It is a private engineering firm with state certification. Their sign-off is legally binding. It costs extra. But they can be here tomorrow morning." I stared at him. "Is that legal?" I asked. "It sounds like a loophole." "It is not a loophole," Elliot said. "It is a fail-safe. It is designed to prevent exactly this kind of bureaucratic hostage-taking. It is the law. Hazel, use it." I wanted to kiss him. Instead, I grabbed his arm. "Get me the list of certified firms," I said. "We hired a firm from the Capitol. They arrived the next morning at 6. They were rigorous, more rigorous than the county would have been, but they were efficient. They tested the alarms. They checked the egress widths. They verified the sprinkler loads. At 4 in the afternoon, the lead engineer stamped the clipboard. "Passed," he said. "We will file the electronic certificate tonight. You are legal to occupy." We had done it. We had bypassed Graham's blockade not with a bribe, but with a better understanding of the rules. But even as we cleared the regulatory hurdle, the financial picture was darkening. Nina Shore, my forensic accountant, asked to meet me again. I found something disturbing about Vantage Capital. She said, "That is the lender Graham is using?" I asked. "Yes. I dug into their funding sources. Vantage isn't just a pool of anonymous hedge fund money. It is a syndicated portfolio. In English." "Nina," I said, "it means the money they lend comes from specific high-net-worth individuals who buy into the fund." She said, "I got a look at the subscriber list." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. I recognized the names immediately. Arthur Sterling, Robert Pence, Judge Holloway. These were not just random rich men. These were the board members of the Halcyon Maritime Club. I felt a cold realization settle over me. "They own his debt," I whispered. "Exactly," Nina said. "The men at the club. The ones who Graham tries so hard to impress. The ones he humiliated you in front of. They are the ones holding his leash. They know he is desperate. They are lending him money at predatory rates because they know he will do anything to pay them back, like fast-tracking their zoning permits or burying his sister's competing resort. It was a coordinated ecosystem of corruption. The club wasn't just a social venue. It was a bank where the currency was influence. Graham wasn't the king. He was the servant, and I was the threat to the entire system. I felt a surge of anger that was hotter and sharper than anything I had felt before. They were all in on it. The smirk on Graham's face at the gala. It wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was a performance for his masters. I picked up my phone. "Jessica," I said when the journalist answered. "This is Hazel Watson. I am ready to talk." We met at a diner 20 miles inland, far away from the prying eyes of Cape Eddings. Jessica Tate looked different than she had at the grocery store. She had her recorder out, and she looked hungry. "I am not here to give you a sob story about my brother," I said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "What is this?" Jessica asked. "This is the internal memo from the Halcyon Club banning me for financial instability," I said. "And this is the audit report from the state proving I am clean. And this is the log of the safety tampering on my site." Jessica opened the envelope. She read the memo. Her eyebrows shot up. "Do not admit," she read. "That is brutal. It is not just brutal," I said. "It is a business model." I leaned in. "The story isn't about a brother and sister fighting. The story is about who gets to succeed in this town. It is about a private club that uses its influence to choke out competition. It is about a network of men who own the debt of the politicians and the developers, and who decide who gets a permit and who gets a subpoena. I pointed to the papers. I built a resort that is open to everyone. I paid fair wages. I refused to cut corners. And because of that, the machinery of this town tried to crush me. They tried to bankrupt me. They tried to frame me." Jessica looked at me. "You are declaring war on the Halcyon Club," she said. "I am telling the truth." I said, "If that is war, then yes." The article ran on Sunday morning. The headline was stark. "The Gatekeeper's Wall. How one woman built a resort in the shadow of the Halcyon's secret debt." It went viral before noon. It wasn't a gossip piece. It was an exposé. Jessica Tate had done her homework. She connected the dots between the zoning delays, the anonymous lawsuit, and the club's exclusionary policies. She published the "Do Not Admit" memo. The internet reaction was instantaneous. People were outraged. The memo became a symbol of everything people hated about the old money elite. "She can't afford the fee." It became a hashtag. But then, something amazing happened. The bookings for the Eddings Shore Resort spiked. People didn't just want to support the underdog. They wanted to see the place that the establishment was so afraid of. We sold out our opening weekend in 4 hours. We sold out the entire month of June by dinner time. I watched the reservation numbers climb on my laptop screen, tears streaming down my face. I had thought the article would protect me. I hadn't realized it would launch me. Monday morning. My phone rang. It was Graham. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was ragged. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "I have nothing to say to you. Graham, I am coming to the site," he said. "Please, just 5 minutes." He arrived in his black SUV. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled. His face was gray. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, sweating panic. We stood on the boardwalk, the wind whipping the dune grass around our legs. "You have to stop this. Hazel," he said. "The article. The donors are furious. They are calling for my resignation from the trust board. Vantage Capital is calling the loan." "That sounds like a personal problem," I said coldly. He reached into his jacket. I flinched, but he only pulled out a document. "I can make it go away," he said. "The lawsuit, the intellectual property claim. I will drop it all. Today." I looked at him. "And in exchange?" He held out the document. "A family settlement," he said. "We merge the assets. You put the resort into the Watson Trust. You keep management control. Of course. We just pool the equity. It strengthens the balance sheet. It calms the lenders down. We present a united front." I took the document. I flipped through the pages. It looked generous on the surface. He was offering to drop the lawsuit with prejudice. He was acknowledging my ownership. But then I saw the clause on page 12. Joint and several liability. If I merged the resort into the trust, I became jointly liable for the trust's debts. I looked up at him. "You want my equity," I said. "No, Hazel. I want peace," he pleaded. "You want my $95 million asset to cover your $50 million hole. I said. You want to mix my clean money with your dirty money so that when Vantage Capital comes for their pound of flesh, they take my resort instead of your club. It is not like that, he shouted. It is exactly like that. I said, you are trying to use me as a human shield. You tried to frame me as the criminal. And when that didn't work, you tried to marry me to the debt. I shoved the document back into his chest. Get off my boardwalk, Graham. He stood there, shaking. You do not understand, he whispered. They are going to destroy me. Then you should not have borrowed money from sharks, I said. He looked at me with pure hatred. You think you have won, he said. But you do not know the whole story. You do not know about Dad. I stopped. What about Dad? Graham laughed. It was a broken, ugly sound. Check the dates. Hazel, check the dates on the first restructuring, the one that gave me control. He turned and walked back to his car. I went back to the trailer. My hands were shaking. Check the dates. I pulled up the digital files Nina Shore had sent me, the formation documents of the current trust structure. My father died on November 12th, 5 years ago. I found the document Graham was talking about, Watson Asset Restructuring Agreement. It was dated November 15th, 3 days after Dad died. I remembered that week. I was in a fog of grief. I was planning the funeral. I was holding my mother's hand while she wept. Graham hadn't been grieving. He had been with the lawyers. I read the preamble. Due to the incapacitation and subsequent passing of Richard Watson, immediate restructuring is necessary to preserve tax status. He had pushed the paperwork through while the body was still cold. He had told Mom it was urgent. He had told her it was necessary to save the house. He had exploited our grief to steal the kingdom. I felt a nausea so deep it made my knees weak. He hadn't just been ambitious. He had been predatory. He had looked at his father's death not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity window. And now, he wanted me to save him. I sat there for a long time as the sun went down over the ocean. I looked at the resort I had built. It was clean. It was honest. And Graham wanted to stain it with his legacy of betrayal. I picked up the phone. I called the chairman of the Watson Coastal Giving Trust Board, not Graham, but the independent director, a retired judge named Halloway, the same Halloway who was on the list of Vantage Capital investors. Judge Halloway. I said, "This is Hazel Watson, Ms. Watson," Halloway said. His voice clipped. "We are aware of the article. It is unfortunate. I have a proposal," I said. "To resolve the conflict. I am listening. I am willing to discuss a settlement." I said, "But not in a back room. I want to address the full board. We can arrange a private session." Halloway said, "No," I said, "a public session. The quarterly meeting is next Thursday. I will come then, and I will bring my terms." Halloway hesitated. "That meeting is open to the community," he said. "Exactly." I said, "If we're going to clear the air, let's do it in the sunshine." I hung up. I wasn't going there to settle. I was going there to finish it. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I met with Nina Shore. I met with Sarah Vance. We organized the emails, the bank transfers, the do not admit memo, and the timeline of my father's death. We built a dossier not for a courtroom, but for a stage. The night before the meeting, I stood on the balcony of the resort. The lights were on. The staff was inside. Training for the opening. It was alive. Elliot came out and stood beside me. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I am terrified," I admitted. "Why?" "Because tomorrow I'm going to execute my brother in public," I said, "and I'm going to break my mother's heart." Elliot took my hand. He broke her heart 5 years ago. "Hazel, you are just showing her the pieces so she can finally sweep them up." I looked at him. He was right. Truth wasn't a weapon. It was a surgery. It hurt, but it was the only way to cut out the rot. I squeezed his hand. "Okay," I said, "let's go show them." The next morning, I put on my best suit, the one I had bought with my own money. I picked up the heavy leather portfolio containing the evidence. I drove to the community center where the trust meeting was being held. The parking lot was full. The press was there. The community was there. Graham was inside, surrounded by his board, thinking he was walking into a negotiation. He thought I was coming to surrender. He was wrong. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. "Showtime," I whispered. I opened the car door and stepped into the light. The fluorescent lights of the community center hummed with a low, electric buzz. It was a stark contrast to the chandeliers of the Halcyon Maritime Club, but on this Tuesday morning, the room held more power than any ballroom on the coast. I sat in the back row, my leather portfolio resting heavy on my lap. The room was packed. Local reporters were setting up tripods in the aisles. Residents of Cape Eddings, the same people who had helped me fix the pier, filled the folding chairs. On the stage, behind a long table draped in blue cloth, sat the board of directors of the Watson Coastal Giving Trust. Graham sat in the center. He looked composed, his suit pressed, his hair perfect, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He was scanning the room, his eyes darting, looking for friendly faces. He didn't find many. Judge Holloway, the chairman, tapped the microphone. "I call this quarterly meeting to order," Holloway said. His voice boomed through the speakers. "We have a full agenda today, including a review of the annual grant allocations." He paused, looking down at his notes. "But first, we have a request to address the board from a member of the beneficiary family, Ms. Hazel Watson." A murmur rippled through the room. Graham stiffened. He leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Chairman," Graham said, his voice smooth but tight, "as we discussed in executive session, my sister and I are in the midst of a private family settlement. I do not believe this is the appropriate forum for personal grievances." I stood up. The scraping of my chair against the linoleum floor was loud in the sudden silence. "This is not a grievance." "Graham," I said, my voice projecting clear and steady to the back of the room, "and it is certainly not private. It concerns the misuse of public charitable funds." I walked down the center aisle. I felt 500 eyes on my back. I felt the ghost of my father walking beside me. I approached the stage. I didn't climb the stairs. I stood in the well. Looking up at them, it forced them to look down at me, but it also made them look small, like children sitting at a high table. "Ms. Watson," Holloway said, warningly, "you have 5 minutes. I do not need 5 minutes to tell you the truth." I said, "I only need the evidence." I opened my portfolio. I took out the first document, blown up to poster size and mounted on foam core board. I set it on an easel I had placed there earlier. It was the "Do Not Admit" memo from the club. 6 months ago, I was barred from the Halcyon Club on the grounds of financial instability. I was told I was a risk. That narrative was carefully constructed to discredit me before I broke ground on my own business. I flipped the board. The next image was the incorporation document of Coastal Horizon Holdings, the shell company that had sued me. Then, I was sued for intellectual property theft by a company that does not exist. I continued, "This company has no employees, no office, but it does have a bank account, and that bank account is funded entirely by the Horizon Strategic Fund." I looked directly at Judge Holloway, a donor-advised fund managed by this board. Graham slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd," he shouted. He stood up, his face flushing red. "She is spinning conspiracy theories because she is jealous. She has always been jealous." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Look at her. She built a spite hotel on a toxic waste dump just to get back at me because Dad left me in charge. This is anti-family betrayal. She is trying to destroy our legacy because she couldn't cut it in the real world." He was unraveling. He was using the old script. Hazel is crazy. Hazel is emotional. But he had forgotten one thing. I wasn't alone. I would like to yield the rest of my time to Ms. Nina Shore, I said calmly. Nina stood up from the front row. She looked every inch the professional predator in her sharp blazer. She walked to the easel and placed a new chart on it. It was a flow of funds diagram. Red lines connected the Watson Trust to the shell company, and from the shell company to a private lender called Vantage Capital. "My name is Nina Shore," she said, her voice crisp. "I am a certified forensic accountant. I have analyzed the trust's ledgers for the past 3 years. She pointed to the red lines. "Mr. Watson claims these transfers were for consulting services." However, I have cross-referenced the invoices. The consulting firm has never produced a report. They have never logged a billable hour. The money, $3 million in the last 12 months, was transferred out of the charity and immediately wired to Vantage Capital to service a private high-interest loan held personally by Graham Watson. The room gasped. It wasn't a polite gasp. It was the sound of a community realizing they had been robbed. "That is a lie," Graham screamed. "Those were legitimate feasibility studies." Nina didn't even look at him. She turned to the next page. "And here," she said, "is a draft document titled Liability Assignment. It was prepared by the Trust's legal counsel. It attempts to name Hazel Watson as the retroactive director of the shell company." She looked at the board members. "The metadata on this file shows it was created 4 weeks ago. It was an exit strategy. You were planning to frame Ms. Watson for the embezzlement you authorized." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. I looked at the board members. They were shifting in their seats. They were looking at Holloway. They were looking at the exit signs. "Judge Holloway?" I asked. "Did you know my name was on that document?" Holloway looked at Graham. He looked at the furious crowd. He looked at the reporters typing frantically on their laptops. He did the calculation that men like him always do. He calculated his own survival. "Graham told us it was necessary," Holloway said. His voice was quiet. Stripped of its boom, Graham whipped his head around. "What are you doing?" "He told us the liquidity crisis at the club required creative bridging," Holloway continued, ignoring Graham. "He said you were the one who suggested the structure." "Hazel. He said you agreed to be the designated responsible party in exchange for the resort land." "I never agreed to anything," I said. "I never signed anything." Holloway slumped. "We were told it was a family arrangement," he said. "We were told to sign off on the designation to protect the trust's endowment from the lenders. We didn't know he was leveraging the charity for his own debt until it was too late." "You coward," Graham hissed. "You signed the checks. You are in this as deep as I am." The board was fracturing in real time. The united front had crumbled into a panic of self-preservation. I watched them turn on each other. It was pathetic. These were the titans of the coast, the men who decided who mattered and who didn't, and they were tearing each other apart to avoid the blame. But there was one more person who needed to speak. I turned to the audience. "Mom," I said. Eleanor Watson stood up. She was wearing a simple gray dress. She held her purse with both hands, clutching it like a shield. She looked terrified. She hated crowds. She hated conflict. For 30 years, she had been the silent ornament of the Watson legacy. But today, she walked to the microphone stand in the aisle. "Mom," Graham pleaded from the stage. His voice cracked. "Do not do this. Go home. I will handle this." Eleanor looked at him. For the first time in my life, I saw her look at him not with adoration, but with clarity. "You handled everything, Graham," she said softly. Her voice trembled, but the microphone caught every word. "You handled the restructuring when your father died," she said. "You made me sign the papers while I was still choosing his casket. You told me it was what he wanted. That was for you," Graham shouted, "to save the house." "And the document last month?" Eleanor asked. "The one that blamed Hazel? You told me it was for tax purposes. You used my signature to try and send your sister to prison." She took a deep breath. She looked at the board, then at the community. "I signed documents I did not read," she said. "I trusted my son because I was too weak to ask questions. I am responsible for that ignorance." She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I am formally requesting, as the primary beneficiary of the estate, that the Attorney General conduct a full independent audit of the Watson Coastal Giving Trust, and I am asking for the immediate resignation of the entire board." The room erupted. People stood up and cheered. It was a release of years of tension, years of watching the Watsons rule from their hill. Graham stood alone at the center of the table. He looked small. He looked like a child whose toy had been taken away. "This is illegal," he shouted over the noise. "You cannot do this. I am the trustee. I control the voting rights." The double doors at the back of the hall opened. 2 men in suits walked in. followed by 2 uniformed state troopers. I recognized the lead auditor from my site inspection. "Graham Watson?" the auditor called out. Graham froze. "We have a warrant to secure the records of the trust," the auditor said, walking down the aisle. "And we would like you to accompany us for questioning regarding the misuse of restricted charitable assets." Graham looked at the police. He looked at me. For a second, I thought he might run. He looked toward the side exit, but then he looked at the crowd. He saw the faces of the people he had looked down on his whole life. He saw the satisfaction in their eyes. He straightened his jacket. He tried to summon the old arrogance, the halcyon mask. "This is a mistake," he said loudly. "My lawyers will clear this up by lunch." He walked off the stage, flanked by the troopers. As he passed me, he stopped. "You burned it all down." "Hazel," he whispered, "hope you like the ashes." I looked him in the eye. "It is not ashes." "Graham," I said, "it is fertilizer." I watched him walk out. The doors closed behind him. The room was chaotic, but I felt a strange stillness. I looked at my mother. She was sitting back down, her head bowed. I went to her and put my hand on her shoulder. She reached up and squeezed my fingers. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The war was over. 2 weeks later, the Eddings Shore Resort opened. It was a perfect evening in May. The sky was a deep, bruising indigo, streaked with the last orange light of the sunset. The air was warm and smelled of salt and jasmine from the new landscaping. The resort was glowing. Every light was on, turning the glass structures into beacons against the dunes. The parking lot was full, not with Ferraris and Bentleys, but with Subarus, pickup trucks, and family sedans. We were fully booked. The lobby was buzzing. I stood near the reception desk, watching the ecosystem I had built come to life. Families were checking in. Kids were running toward the aquarium tank and the conservation center. Couples were walking out toward the boardwalk, hand in hand. It was exactly what I had dreamed of. It was open. It was real. But as I watched, I felt a heavy stone in my chest. I saw the grand opening banner, and I thought about the emptiness of the seat next to my mother at the corner table in the dining room. Graham was out on bail, but he was exiled. The trust was frozen. The assets were being liquidated to pay back the stolen funds. The Halcyon Club was facing its own investigation. I had won. But the victory tasted like iron. I had dissected my family to save my creation. "Hazel." I turned. Elliot was standing there. He had traded his work boots for dress shoes and a clean button-down shirt. He held 2 glasses of champagne. "You look like you are at a funeral," he said, handing me a glass. "I feel a little bit like I am," I admitted. He clinked his glass against mine. "You are not," he said. "You are at a birth. Births are messy. They involve a lot of pain and screaming, but then you have something alive at the end of it." I looked at the room again. I saw Mara Klein laughing with the head of maintenance. I saw the waitstaff moving with the confidence of owners, knowing they had a stake in the profit. "It is alive," I said. "Come on," Elliot said. "Let's walk the boardwalk." You have not actually walked it since we pulled the tape down. We walked out into the cool night air. The boardwalk was crowded. People nodded to me as we passed. "Nice place, Hazel." "Good work, Ms. Watson." It wasn't the fawning deference they used to give my father. It was respect. It was the acknowledgement of one worker to another. We stopped at the end of the pier, looking out at the dark water. The waves crashed rhythmically against the pilings we had reinforced together. Elliot leaned his elbows on the railing. "So, what is next?" he asked. "You conquered the coast. You toppled the king. Do you retire?" I laughed. "I cannot retire. I have a $95 million loan to service, and I have to figure out how to keep this place running now that the adrenaline of the fight is gone." "You will figure it out," he said. "You are good at the boring stuff, too." He turned to look at me. The moonlight caught the gray in his beard. "I am proud of you, Hazel, not for the building, but for the way you did it." I looked at him. I felt the pull, the easy comfort of his presence. It would be so easy to lean into him, to let this be the movie ending where we kiss under the moonlight and the credits roll. But I wasn't ready. My armor was still on. I had spent 6 months fighting a war where intimacy was a weapon used against me. I needed time to learn how to be soft again. Thank you, Elliot. I said, that means more than you know. I reached out and took his hand. I didn't pull him closer. I just held it. A promise of something for later. When the dust settled. He squeezed back. Understanding. I should get back to the boiler room, he said with a grin. The pressure gauge on the main heater was twitching earlier. I want to keep an eye on it. He was a romantic in his own way. Go, I said, save my heater. He walked back toward the resort. I stayed on the pier for a moment, listening to the ocean. I walked back up to the main building and climbed the stairs to the owner's suite on the top floor. It had a private balcony that overlooked the entire curve of the bay. I stepped out. The wind was stronger up here. I could see the lights of Cape Eddings to the north, and far to the south, the faint, dim glow of the Halcyon Club. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was late, past midnight. I had a new message. It was from an unknown number. I hesitated. The last time I received an anonymous message, it had started this entire war. I opened it. There was no text, just a photo. It was a photograph of a document, a printed email, dated 2 years ago. I zoomed in. The email was from Arthur Sterling, the senior partner of the law firm that had sued me, and a board member of the Halcyon Club. It was addressed to Vantage Capital Partners. Subject: The Watson Problem. Graham is over-leveraged. He is becoming a liability. If he defaults, we can't seize the trust assets directly without public scrutiny. We need a trigger event. Proposal: encourage him to overextend on the zoning bribes. Let him dig the hole deeper. Once he is desperate, we offer the restructuring that ties the family estate to the debt. When he collapses, we take the land, the club, and the trust endowment. I stared at the screen. My blood ran cold. Graham hadn't just been a villain. He had been a mark. The men at the club, Sterling, Holloway, Pence, they hadn't been helping him. They had been feeding him rope. They knew he was incompetent. They knew he was insecure. They had encouraged his worst impulses, pushed him to borrow more, pushed him to break the law. Also, they could eventually swallow the entire Watson fortune when he imploded. Graham was the pawn. They were the players. And by destroying Graham, I hadn't destroyed the system. I had just removed their useful idiot. Now, I was the one holding the assets. I was the one with the successful resort. I was the one with the land they had wanted for 20 years. The game wasn't over. It had just moved to a higher table. I looked out at the dark ocean. The waves looked black and endless. I felt a flash of fear. I was tired. I wanted to rest. But then, I looked down at the boardwalk. I saw the lights of the resort I had built. I saw the place where my staff was earning a living, where the town was finding its pride. I wasn't going to let them take it. I wasn't 10 years old anymore. I wasn't the little sister. I was the woman who had walked into the fire and walked out with the gold. I turned my phone off. I held it in my hand for a long moment, feeling the weight of the device, the weight of the new truth. Then, I turned it back on. I watched the screen light up, the white apple glowing in the darkness. I tapped the reply button. Okay, I whispered to the wind. Show me. I hit send. The fight was bigger than my family, and I was finally ready. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Hazel Watson and the Salt Glass Resort. It has been a journey of betrayal, grit, and ultimately, vindication. I would love to hear where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below and let me know which part of the world you call home. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Revenge Stories for more realistic, family-centered dramas. What did you think of the ending? Do you think Hazel should go after the Halcyon board? Or should she focus on her peace? Share your thoughts in English in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for your time.